welcome to the shop. We've got a pretty good episode lined up for you. We're going to do the second of a two-part series. Last week we looked at the history of E-Ink. Specifically, we looked at the top 5 technological improvements since E-Ink was released. This week we're going to look forward. So this is the future. The last episode was the past. That'll be our first segment. The second segment is we're going to talk about our tip of the week, and it's going to be around file structures. I know that's the most sexiest topic I could have picked, but actually I think you're going to find it really helpful. So look forward to that, and we're going to close out with a quote of the week. At the end, we'll do a little bit of teaser for next week's episode. So that's our episode today. I hope you like it. I just want to remind you to please, if you would, become a subscriber and like the video if you like it. And it would help me out a lot, and I would really appreciate it. All right, with that, let's get to it. To look to the future of where E-Ink is headed and to kind of speculate in a fun way, I thought we would pose 5 different questions about the future of E-Ink. So I'm going to pose the question, then I'll give what I think is the best answer to that question, and then you'll disagree and tell me what your thoughts are in the comments. So let's have fun with it, and we'll start with question number 1. Will E-Ink screens replace LCD screens, say, over the next 10 years? I think the answer to that is no. Now, we do see a trend of E-Ink screens on phones. I think there might be some prototypes out there for tablets. We're certainly starting to see E-Ink monitors. So this technology is coming around. But the question here is, are we going to see mass adoption where at work or at home, people, instead of buying an LCD or kind of equivalent technology screen, will they go with E-Ink instead? And I just don't think that's going to happen. I think we will see those products kind of gain a little bit of popularity, but I think they're fundamentally going to remain a niche product. I understand that for some folks, there's this issue of eye strain, and if they could switch to an E-Ink screen, they would. I just don't think that's the norm. I'll give myself as an example. I sometimes work all day long on a computer screen. I'll come home, and I'm more than happy to come to my study and watch videos on my curved LCD screen. It's not a problem at all. I like E-Ink, of course. I prefer to read off of E-Ink. I just think it's a more pleasant experience. But there are things that you can do to basically, to handle LCD screens over long periods of time, like looking away for certain periods of time. And there's just some self-care steps that people can take. I think LCD screens have been around a long time now. They're cheap, they have massive refresh rates, and I think we know what the impact is for the most part on our eyes, and it's something that can be managed. Now, my one caveat to this, if there happens to be this research and this longitudinal study, and it turns out that, we were wrong all along, exposed contact to LCD screens causes eye cancer or something like that, that could change fundamentally the dynamic. I just don't see that happening, and I think E-Ink remains a niche product for those product classes, for monitors, for phones, for tablets. You'll see more of them. I just don't think it'll be the norm. Okay, that's question number 1. Question number 2. Will E-Ink note-taking devices finally take off and become mainstream? So let me give you a little bit of context here. I think pretty much, when I talk to people about E-Ink devices, the first thing I do for people that aren't quite sure what I'm talking about is I'll throw out, it's like a Kindle. And they'll immediately understand what it is I'm talking about. In other words, I think that for the e-reading space, that product category has absolutely taken off, is mainstream, and is well regarded and understood by people. E-note-taking devices are not. So at my workplace, and I work for a very large company, there aren't a lot of people that use E-Ink note-taking devices, and the ones that do are the people I've kind of influenced and had to get into that space. So it's just not the norm at all. So the question is, will it become the norm? Will E-Ink note-taking devices be in the same place as e-readers are today? I don't think so. I do think that e-note-taking devices are going to continue to be more popular. That market will grow. but I just don't see it where there's that same foothold that, say, the Kindle has for e-note-taking devices. If there's a chance that it does become much more mainstream, it will have to be a company like Amazon, or I guess Apple, some very large company that just the fact that that company released the device draws people's attention, for something like a much larger mass adoption to occur. I just don't see that. I know that the Scribe is moving from Kindle, is moving kind of into that territory, but I still think it's relatively niche. And I don't think that's going to change fundamentally in the next 10 years. But I do think the popularity of these note-taking devices will grow. More people will be using them. I just don't think they'll be as ubiquitous as e-readers. Okay, question number 3. What are the next tech advancements for e-ink? And believe it or not, I think it remains color. Even though that with Kaleido 3 and to a much lesser extent Gallery 3, we've seen significant inroads into using color, and it's very functional. There's a lot of limitations to that, and I think that e-ink to expand beyond its current utility, I think it's all going to be about color and the development and evolution of that. And not just the color itself, but the refresh rates associated with color and things like that. I still think color, it remains the next frontier for e-ink. It's just that it hasn't started. It's not that it hasn't started, it has, but we'll continue to build on that over the next decade. And I think that'll be the main thing. I suppose you could look at products like the Tab Ultra, the X, and the Tab Ultra C, where we're finally integrating a graphics chip into the process, but I'm not quite sure that's really the future of e-ink, although I do expect those developments to continue. I think color is going to still remain the primary focus of development. Will e-ink start to wane in computer devices over the next decade as competing tech comes out? In other words, is e-ink's current position safe, let alone the previous questions which focus more on growth and development? Is someone going to challenge e-ink in the space where they exist now, especially for e-readers and for e-note-taking devices? I don't think so for e-readers. As much as a book is a very special format for reading, and is a certain format that people can't live without. My wife loves books and prefers those over any other format, including e-readers. Well, I think a lot of people feel the same way about e-readers, frankly. And I just don't see another technology being able to out e-read an e-ink e-reader. I think an e-ink e-reader has really perfected that experience, and I just don't see how another technology could come in and improve upon it. I mean, what dimension would it improve upon it? It probably wouldn't be around, the battery life or the crispness of the screen or the refresh rate. I mean, all these things e-ink does pretty well. I mean, we'll see incremental improvements, of course, but I don't think anything else is going to come out of nowhere and blow e-ink out of the water. For e-readers, note takers, I don't know why, but my gut tells me that is a potential area where there might be some disruption in the e-ink space. I couldn't point to any particular technological advancement that might threaten e-ink. I'm just not as sure. And maybe it's because e-note-taking devices don't have the foothold that e-readers do, and we talked about that earlier. But I think the potential is there. I just don't know what the technology is. Now, if you're asking what I actually expect will happen in the next 10 years, I think e-ink note-taking devices will remain. They'll be refined. They'll be a larger market share than they are now. I don't expect another technology to come and disrupt it, but it is not impossible. It could happen. Okay, last question. What is the most interesting thing that could happen with e-ink? So if you think about it, we just kind of painted this picture, or I've painted this picture, that E-ink is not going to replace LCD screens. And if that's true, that's really where mass adoption would occur. So if you can't beat them, maybe join them. Maybe the most interesting thing that could happen with E-ink is the integration of the E-ink technology with LCD or OLED or what have you screens, where you could literally switch between one or the other. We're starting to see examples now of devices that have kind of the dual function. So maybe there'll be an LCD screen over here, and then there'll be an E-ink screen over there, and they'll kind of work together. Maybe a phone where the main screen is LCD, but the outside casing has an E-ink screen. So that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is literally you're looking at a screen. It's as functional as any LCD screen in one mode, but then you can switch that mode and it's functional as an E-ink screen, but it's the same screen. I think that might be the biggest disruption and the biggest potential for growth for E-ink if they're able to figure out how to do that. You can have the best of all worlds. You can have the refresh rates, the color vibrancy, all the advantages of LCD screens, but you can then switch it over when it's helpful for lower power consumption, to be easier on the eyes. Maybe, for example, instead of looking at an LCD screen for an hour and then maybe trying to take a break to kind of rest your eyes, maybe the break isn't disengaging from the screen, it's switching over to the E-ink screen for a period of time. And maybe the software does that automatically, so you get those breaks without having to think about it. Those are just some examples of where it would be advantageous. Is it possible to marry these two items on a screen? I haven't seen an example of it. There was one particular example that was trying to replicate that experience from about a decade ago, and it went nowhere. But I think if there's one surprise in store for us with E-ink going forward, that would be it. Integrating the two. And it would change everything. The adoption rates of E-ink would now suddenly be uncapped, because instead of trying to replace LCDs, you're now complementing them in a very functional way. Anyway, anytime you look into the future, it's always a guessing game. We're all prone to try to draw a line from the past and extrapolate it forward, which doesn't work a lot of the time. But it's fun to speculate, and those are my speculations of the future of E-ink, at least over the next decade or so. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you disagree with or other ideas that you have, and leave those in the comments and I'll respond to them accordingly. But for the purposes of this video, those were my 5 questions and answers about the future of E-ink. Hope you enjoyed it. So for this week, we're offering a tip, and this is around your file structure. Now, imagine yourself, you've just bought an e-note-taking device, very excited, you've already started to go in and write notes, and this is the perfect time not to create a structure, but to think about the structure that you want to use moving forward. Doing that allows you to save yourself from a little bit of heartache and annoyances down the line once you find you've got all these folders and files and they're not organized the way that you like. And trying to arrange those and put those into the order is quite a bit of effort. It's certainly doable, but it's something you want to try to avoid. So this is the tip to help you think about how you're going to structure your folders and files, and then you will implement that as you go. So we're going to start off by talking about the first of 3 examples to help you think about how you want to structure your files. And this example is what I call a flat structure. So a flat structure is really ideal if you've got, give or take, about 20 notebooks, and everything essentially can fit in 1 or 2 pages. In this particular case, there's no sense in having any folders. You can just open the notebook. Most of your notes will be right there in front of you or a page away. So let's take a look at an example of that. So thanks to the Supernote, we see here an example of the flat file structure. And every item that you see on the screen is an icon for a notebook. and all the notebooks fit here in this case, on 2 pages. We've got 12 notebooks on one page and a couple on the other. If we change the view, we can actually fit more notebooks onto one page. In this particular view, we have 14, and then there's kind of a mid view that has 8. The recommendation, generally speaking, is try to keep all your files in 1 to 2 pages, because that allows you the minimal number of clicks to get into a notebook. And that's an example of the flat notebook structure. Okay, so a second example of a file folder structure is what I call a single layer. And a single layer is basically, you're going to go into your notebook, and instead of seeing a page of files, you see a page of folders. And then all of your files are just one layer deep into each folder. And this is a good file structure that can handle, 100 or so notebooks. Depending on how you're structured. It's the file system that I predominantly use, with just some small tweaks here or there. And I think it's probably the best structure for most people. So let's take a look at an example of that in action. So again, we return to the supernote, and here we see the single layer structure in action. And every icon you see here is a folder. Ideally, all the folders fit on one page. In this particular case, I go over to 2, but again, if I change the view, I can get all of the folders onto one page. The idea then is that we drill down further. We'll go back to the icon view. If you drill down into the Apple folder, then it's, again, just files. And that is basically the single layer file structure in action. So the last example I want to give is something that I call the branch system, or branch example. And that's basically, it's similar to the single layer in that you go into your notebook and you see a bunch of folders. The difference is that you may have multiple folders within every folder as needed. So I kind of drew out an example of what that might look like on the Eink note. And there it is. So you'll notice on the left side, you start off with your folders, again, much like the single layer. But then, as you drill down, you have more folders as needed. The thought process here is that you would create a new folder at the time that you fill up your page full of notes. And so you're trying to keep all your notes onto one page, and then you move down to the next folder and keep the notes on one page, etc. The value of this system is it can handle a really large number of notebooks and still keeps it in a nice, tight, organized manner. There's one theme that runs through all these structures. And if you can think about it, think of 2 axes. One axis is files. So if as I go along, I'm swiping the page and seeing files on each page. The other axis is around folders. So a lot of our examples from today is drilling down through folders. The thing that you really want to avoid, you can move along the file axes, you can move along the folder axes. You don't want to do both, or if you do, you want to do it in a very limited fashion, because by going along both axes, you're creating a ton of a really massive structure. So the reason why I focus so much on keeping everything on 1 to 2 pages is to keep it tight and much easier to navigate. You introduce 2 dimensions, and all of a sudden you've got a lot more complexity potentially in your system, and then your structure may not be that effective. So that's just my 2 cents. But those are some examples of how to structure your files. And again, the key really isn't necessarily to put a lot of work in the beginning around this. It's just to think about what your structure is. So as you create that next notebook, you know intuitively, oh wait, you know what? I should be creating another folder for this. Or this is perfectly fine, just creating a notebook and popping it in the main directory. So I hope that helps. And that was your tip of the week. So I originally planned to give an update, hopefully a system update to the Big Me Galley. And for those that don't know, the Galley is the only commercially available device that features Gallery 3. So there's a lot of interest in it. It's been kind of a raw experience thus far, so any development is definitely of note and worth tracking. However, it's been a few weeks now since they've indicated they were working on this update, and they still have yet to release it, so I don't have that. So instead, we're going to give you a quote of the week. And this quote comes from Archimedes, who said, "Give me where to stand, and I will move the earth." Maybe that's a bit pretentious in the context of this video series, but the hope is to provide information to help you know where to stand so that you can move the earth, make the world better around you. So take that for what you will. That is your quote of the week. Well, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, please subscribe and thumbs up if you like the video. Would really appreciate it. I've got a pretty exciting episode for next week, I think. I'm going to be comparing, in large part, the Inknote Color Plus from Bigme versus the Books Tab Ultra C. So this is an interesting comparison I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've done a lot of preliminary work on it, and I've been pretty surprised at the results. So I've got more work to do. We'll see where we land, but you're going to see that full comparison next week. So I hope to see you then. Meantime, thank you for coming, and I hope you have a great week.